Hey, welcome to the workshop of the Captiva Erosion Prevention District on this Thursday, February 17th at 1 p.m. This workshop will now come to order. Administrative Director, please read the roll.
All right, Chairman Sylvia.
Here.
Vice Chairman Maville.
Here.
Treasurer Pyle. Not here. Commissioner Laird.
Here.
And Commissioner Walter.
Hmm.
Not here.
Okay, so do I understand, Administrative Director, that we have 3 people here?
3 out of 5.
3 out of 5, correct. Okay, we will now open the floor to public comments. There is a limit of 3 minutes for each citizen. Please remember to state your name for the record. Is there anyone who would like to speak?
I see no hands in the attendees.
Okay,
And no hands in the panelists.
public comments are now closed. Any questions going forward can be asked via chat in the room meeting window. Before we begin, again, the focus of this workshop is exclusively on the presentation being made by Dr. Hapke and not on other presentations such as Aptum or on Carrie Schuman's presentation to be made next week, simply because I don't want to get crosswise on presentations and research, et cetera, et cetera. So I really want to focus just on what Dr. Hapke, in respect to her efforts, exclusively on her own work. At this time, I turn the meeting over to Dr. Hapke.
I have a quick note. Bob Walters joined us.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you make sure you mark him present for
Yep.
this meeting? Thank you.
Would you need to respond as being here?
No.
So shall I share screen and move forward?
You move forward, kid. You got it.
Oh, I gotta stop
sharing your
sharing.
screen so she can-
All right, go ahead.
Try that again. Oh. Screen. So hopefully everyone can see the screen that I'm sharing.
You can.
Mhm.
Sure.
That's good.
Okay. So, thank you very much for your being the audience here today. I appreciate CEPD, giving me the time to come and present the work that I've been doing with the Captiva Sea Level Rise Committee. And so today's focus is looking at some conceptual adaptation strategy designs that we've developed for the Bayside. And I want to start by saying I'm going to give a little bit of a background to like how we got to where we are right now. And I apologize if that says the Captiva Community Panel Meeting, and if not, I should have changed it in the date. I apologize for that mistake, but I know I'm presenting to the Captiva Erosion Prevention District. At any rate, so moving forward with the presentation, some of you have met me before, others have no idea who I am, so I thought I'd give a little bio on myself. I have a PhD in coastal geology from UC Santa Cruz. I spent over 20 years actually, with the USGS as a research scientist, studying coastal change hazard and vulnerabilities. It was a great career, but I decided to exit federal service and I took early retirement in 2019. After that, I joined with Integral, who I'm with now. And as my role at Integral, I'm the coastal resilience lead of for the East and Gulf coasts. And basically what my job is to work with communities and also coastal facilities to help them understand what's going on, model coastal hazards, do vulnerability and risk assessments. We have economics capabilities as well, so we can look at the economics of adaptation and cost benefits and that sort of thing, and really specifically help to develop future adaptation plans to address both storms and sea level rise hazards. I also have a research professor appointment at the University of South Florida's College of Marine Science here in St. Pete, where I sit. And in that capacity, I'm actually a co-PI on a NOAA grant. So in I was very honored last year. The Association of Engineering and Environmental Geologists chose me in a nationwide award to be the Johns Distinguished Lecturer. And I was also, after completing my tenure as Johns Distinguished Lecturer, I was awarded a presidential citation from that organization, national organization. I have over 80 peer-reviewed papers and book chapters and technical reports and lots of things that I've written and published. And I've also served as a coastal science subject matter expert to numerous local, state, and federal agencies, including doing a detail to FEMA as a coastal science expert during right after Hurricane Sandy struck the New York, New Jersey coastline. That's just a little bit about me. And I love what I do. And you'll see I'm enthusiastic about what I do. So where are we? So this current project that I'm going to be talking about today was initiated after Integral, my group, completed a baseline sea level rise vulnerability assessment for the Captiva Sea Level Rise Committee. That vulnerability assessment looked at what was likely to be impacted with 1, 2, and 4 feet of sea level rise, and it was completed in 2020. And that included not just seeing where water would flow during high tide, but it also brought in what infrastructure would be impacted when. So looking at roads, looking at critical infrastructure, looking at residential buildings, commercial buildings, and so understanding what the time frame for the impacts to different infrastructure on the island. The vulnerability assessment that we conducted only included the sea level rise, not storms. It's not that we don't have the capacity to include storms, and it's not that we're not interested in including storms, but at the time, given the scope of what the committee wanted to look at and the limited funding that was available, we only looked at sea level rise because we wanted to get moving forward. We have submitted 3 grant proposals together to conduct full assessments of both Captiva and Sanibel together that would include storm modeling as well as sea level rise. Okay, so once we handed in the vulnerability assessment to Captiva, the Sea Level Rise Committee specifically, I worked closely with them to identify 5 priority areas on the bay side of the island based on that vulnerability assessment. And we focused on the one that was 2 feet, because that's when it seemed like things were going to go from kind of a little bit bad to much worse. So the Sea Level Rise Committee was able to fund Integral, and I think actually CEPD contributed toward that, to fund Integral to develop conceptual adaptation designs focused on the 2 feet of sea level rise scenario, and for each of the 5 bayside priority areas that the committee identified. So far, the Integral has presented the designs to the Sea Level Rise Committee. That's been an iterative process. What I mean is I presented the designs and they said, that's not really going to work, or we'd like to see this here, or that would be better. And so we went back to the drawing board literally and, changed things and presented it again. And we did that a couple times. We have presented to the Captiva community panel, and we're currently working on a technical memorandum that'll be available to the community. And but as part of that technical memorandum, we don't want to finalize it until we have vetted this to both CEPD and the community of Captiva. So that meeting should be happening short sometime in the next few weeks. Hopefully. I do want to mention that all these steps that we're undertaking, or that the Sea Level Rise Committee is undertaking with me as part of them, is following Florida DEP's recommended adaptation planning guidebook. And the steps in, the Sea Level Rise Committee really took the initiative to do step 1, which was assembling a steering committee and all that kind of thing. And then they brought me in at the point, and I've been working with them ever since, doing the vulnerability assessment, identifying focus areas, and where we are now and moving down this roadway is starting to look at different adaptation strategies. So that's where we are today, but this is based on, we're following the guidebook as put forth by Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Excuse me, I got some terrible background. I don't know if anybody else is hearing that as well.
Is everybody on mute except for me?
Yeah, Cheryl, what it is, there's some kind of feedback. It's similar to when I put these little balls in my wine decanter to clean it. It's like metal balls going around a glass.
Second.
And you think it's on my end?
It's definitely on your end. It's, yeah. But I mean, I can deal with it. It's cool with me, but it's definitely, it's not a feedback loop. It's more of a static loop, but it's unique.
I wonder, my computer fan is on and I'm wondering if that.
Oh, now you sound good. Now you sound perfect.
Really?
No, not anymore. Sorry.
No, interesting. If I lean here,
No.
no. I'm not sure. I can try to see if there's some original sound. Turn on original sound. I'm afraid to screw a set.
Linda, you're a technician. Any words of wisdom here? I mean, it's okay. I
Yeah,
can-
we
This
can push
stuff,
through.
but my technical thing would be find the mic and blow it.
There you go. That might work.
Mic.
Well, my mic is in my camera. Is that any better?
Yeah, it's a little better. I don't know. It's like something vibrates whenever you speak. So it could be a a physical thing. When no, it can't be. No. It's an audio thing. It's just it's like a bad wire or something, but it's okay. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is the battery. I'm sorry. I mean, the fan is on my laptop, and I've never had this issue before.
Oh, do you have are you using a Mac Air?
No, I'm using a Windows machine, a Dell.
Oh, okay. No, because Windows had a problem with, iMac had a problem with Mac Air. It's what I use. And the fan would kick on for no reason. But
All
anyway,
right, we can continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oops, sorry. Okay, yeah, so you can all actually hear me. It's just really distracting is what you're saying.
we can live with it.
Okay, thank you.
Sally Ford.
Okay, I'll keep moving forward. Okay, so there we have that. So one of the first things that we did as part of the vulnerability assessment, so I want to take you back a little bit, just a little bit of background information. One of the very first things we did was look at the coastal typology and exposure of the barrier island itself, where we mapped out the type of coastline it was, whether it was sandy, which is shown in the yellow line. Oh, and for people who aren't used to looking at aerial photography, just to orient you, I don't want to forget to say this. This is Captiva flipped on its side and chopped in half. So South Seas Resort, the north end of the island, is in the upper left in this panel, and then you're moving long south as we go from left to right. And then we pick up on the lower panel where we continue to move south from left to right, and then this is Blind Pass, just to kind of get your brain oriented around what you're looking at. So here's basically demarcating where there's, where it's sandy shoreline, where it's mangrove forest, where there are existing seawalls or riprap, and then areas where it's mixed, right? We call this bright green, we call this landscaping and mangrove, but we did not ground truth these data. So we absolutely are aware that there are likely places within this mixed use, the lighter green, where there could be a seawall or mangroves underneath the mangrove canopy that we wouldn't have picked up by this visual rendering. So we just acknowledge that does exist, but the fact is the mangroves are there, so it still can be classified as partial mangrove coastline. We looked at, again, the land use, the geomorphology, including elevation, the exposure. What kind of exposure? Is it exposed to waves? Is it exposed to currents? Is it exposed to both? That kind of thing. So that's really important in understanding both vulnerability and moving forward with adaptation. So, and then because it's done in GIS, you can actually have numbers on this, so you can start to understand the amount of coasts of different types you have to deal with. So obviously the mangrove forest type or mangrove fringe dominates the bay side of the island. And then beaches and the kind of mixed use, the landscaping are very similar, and then everything else is fairly small. But these can be useful when you're starting to actually wanting to do quantitative calculations. Okay, so then finally, this is just the picture. I'm not taking you through all of the scenarios for sea level rise. I'm only going to show you right here the 2 feet, because this is the one, like I said, it goes from a little bit bad to a lot worse in terms of tidal inundation impacts for the island on the bay side. And you can see with 2 feet of sea level rise, which given the recent reports that have been coming out from NOAA, we could get to this 2 feet a lot sooner than we had thought even a week ago. And you can see large parts of the, I mean, almost all of the bay side of Captiva is showing some type of inundation impact. So at high tide, it will be flooded in these areas, compromising roads like Plantation Road in some cases, inundating properties. And as we run all along, you can see, pretty substantial inundation potential along the bay side of the island. And so this was what the Sea Level Rise Committee then wanted to say, okay, what are some of the things that we should start thinking about doing to address this challenge that we're going to be facing? So they, working with them, based on the priority, they identified 5 focused priority areas. I'm going to go through each one of those, and then we'll get to the adaptation design. So the first is Chadwick Bayou. There's the blow up of that boxes in this lower image on the right. And you can see clearly that there's areas of Plantation Road and the road out to the water plant here that are going to be compromised. And even some of the properties are starting to be encroached on, actually structures, residences or other buildings. And it's important when we start thinking, like when my group starts thinking about what kind of adaptations can be designed for this area, for each site, we need to know something about the site properties. And so we know that for this area, we can, based on our assessment, has low wave exposure, protective seagrass beds and shoals, large accommodation space. I'm going to use that term a couple times. What I mean by that is that there is a lot of room from the shoreline out where you can place things, where you can place design objects or designs, adaptation designs, features. And so you have a lot of space to work with. This area has low gradient and low tidal flow. So we're going to design our adaptation strategy based on understanding of those properties. Moving along moving south, the next 2 areas are around the area around the village, and we have areas 2 and 3. They both have a potential for exposure to waves with the right storm conditions, storm waves coming up. They're openly exposed to Pine Island Sound. Not a lot of accommodation space, so because of Roosevelt Channel, especially in Site 3, there's not a lot of room to put adaptation features because the channel is there, and that's used for navigation and boating. Definitely some tidal flow impacts, and one of the key things is you might say, well, Chadwick Bayou was this big box. Why did you split this area into 2 boxes, Sites 2 and 3? Excuse me. And that's because they have different orientations. So that if a storm generating waves coming out of this direction would directly impact the shoreline of priority area 2, but would run almost parallel to priority area 3 and not have the same impacts. Conversely, if the storm waves, the right storm, were coming out of this direction, they would directly impact this stretch of coast, but almost be run parallel and not as impactful in 2. So that's why we've divided those into 2 separate areas.
Cheryl, don't you have the impact of Buck Key for area 3 as well, that it may?
No, that's coming up next.
Okay,
2 and 3 are both openly exposed to Pine Island Sound.
okay.
Depending on the right storm.
Depending on the storm.
Yeah. So here, the site number 4 and 5 are shown on this map. Number 4 is Buck Key. We wanted to pick an area where there had, where there were obviously going to be some impacts from tidal inundation, but an area that was very protected. So Buck Key is protecting this from any kind of storm surge potential. And so it's, whatever is designed, whatever adaptation design there, doesn't need to worry about waves. Here you are going to have some tidal flow, and again, you have very little accommodation space. And the 5th priority area was this area at Blind Pass. You can see it zoomed in a little bit down here. This has a potential for some wave exposure depending on the right storm, but less than the sites near the village. But certainly large tidal flow impacts because we're at the confluence of Roosevelt Channel and Blind Pass, and also a little accommodation space here as well. So we don't have a lot of room to play with. So when we started thinking about what can be done, working with the Sea Level Rise Committee to come up with potential adaptation designs, we considered a range of adaptation solutions. And that range goes from what are referred to in the literature and in the field as green to gray. Just thinking back historically, like when people started populating the coastline in earnest, really started in the 60s and then has been exploding ever since, and living on or near the coast is a very desirable thing to do. The kind of mantra, and with that, the erosion and flooding issues, the go-to methodology for kind of preventing that erosion and certainly damage of any kind of structure was to put in a hard structure, what was called gray infrastructure, things like seawalls, revetments, and bulkheads. And that was basically, these are trying to stop nature from having the impact that it has. In the past decade, and especially in the past 5 years, there's been a real paradigm shift to looking at greener solutions. Maybe not totally green, might not work in every area, but even the Army Corps of Engineers has an entire program called Engineering with Nature. And the idea is to start doing things that allow nature to still do its thing, but still provide that protection. And so a lot of those, FEMA endorses this, NOAA endorses this, the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's what a lot of the field is looking at. Obviously, there's areas where that you just don't want to do that. And I think it's important to say it doesn't have to be one or the other. There are what we call hybrid solutions. So there are designs that one can develop that do have some hardening features in them, but also accommodate some natural part of the natural system and allow natural processes to take place. So when we were developing our conceptual designs for the Sea Level Rise Committee, we considered the green versus the gray options. We evaluated the designs, and I'll show you, you'll see the elements of the designs based on the efficacy, the economics, the sustainability, the impacts on nature, whether they were consistent with the Captiva plan, community plan, and whether they would be permittable in an aquatic preserve, because we are dealing with being situated within an aquatic preserve. The elements that I'm going to show you in the designs are interconnected. They're designed to be used together and complement one another, work together. And this is just a statement in general. No matter what you do for adaptation, all adaptation strategies will require some sort of maintenance through time, just like having to re-nourish the beach. It's the same thing. Nourishing beaches is actually an adaptation strategy. We're just considering different things for the bayside. So I'm going to show you a few pictures in a minute that are the designs themselves, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the elements that are in those designs, just to make sure everyone's on the same page for, these will be combined to behave in an interconnected way with each other. So the different design elements that look like these little gray squiggles that are in the middle of the left-hand side of your image. The bottom photo is kind of what they would look like if you were out in the water. So what are these? These are mangrove seedlings. So this is, what you can do is plant mangrove seedlings or put mangrove seedlings in. It's inexpensive, and the idea is to encourage mangrove recovery and propagation, because mangroves do provide protection from storm surge, and they also help to create a healthy biodiversity. They can be used in locations that have low exposure to waves and tidal flow, or in places that are protected from waves and tidal flow by other adaptation features. Another approach is to not use little seedlings, but actually plant still young but more established mangrove trees. And again, this does the same thing. It restores the mangroves or helps them propagate, but this would be used in areas where maybe the mangroves have been removed or heavily cropped and thinned, and where the tidal flow is too high for seedlings to be able to survive. You'll see in some of the designs, this on the left is salt-tolerant vegetation. This is kind of put at the fringe of a landscape area where there may be a design in the just offshore, but there may, during a storm or during, a really high tide event, if some water with wind gets pushed over, that it's really more for aesthetics. but also having vegetation there helps hold the ground in place. It helps prevent erosion. So it provides a root system to hold elevated fill in place, and it provides aesthetics. And this is used in landward locations where no plantings exist, or where you've elevated the land with fill. And then before we move on to some of the harder concepts, we have another thing is to try to encourage landward propagation of the mangrove forest, and in this case, possibly planting upland species like black mangroves that can exist higher in the intertidal zone. And again, this is more to extend the landward migration of the mangrove forest or fringe. And then just a couple more. Now we're getting into the things that provide more protection. On the left-hand side, you can see me. I know this looks funny. This blob with dots in it. It's a feeder berm. You're looking at it from a side view, like if you kind of slice a cake and you're looking at the side of the cake. So it's just a long linear mound of sediment that is actually designed to erode, to work with nature, slowly erode. And oftentimes, as you'll see in our designs, mangrove seedlings are planted landward of this berm, and the berm continues to provide material for those mangrove seedlings to take hold. But it also provides some protection, slight protection from possible wave energy. Reef balls are a really cool concept. If you haven't seen them, maybe you're familiar with them. They are being used quite a bit now. They're made with a fiberglass mold that's filled with concrete. And the cool thing is, and they have holes in them, but they're hard, right? So they provide protection, but they also increase biodiversity. Juvenile fish refuges will go in here, little crabs and things like that. And then you'll see the picture I have in the lower right here, that's actually at a coastal park on Tampa Bay, about 2.5 blocks from my park. So this is at very low tide, but this is actually the implementation of a reef ball living shoreline project. So these are actually quite good at providing protection in areas of high tidal flow or wave exposure. And I think this might be my last one on the design elements, and then we'll start looking at things. So another option, and especially in areas where there's a lot of waves and you have a decent tidal flow, and that's using a rock sill. It's a little bit different than your standard riprap. These are a little bit smaller, and they're kind of designed to be interlocking. And we in our designs, we use them to provide protection for the sediment berms. So you'll just see that pile rock. And finally, this is another feature that's being used a lot today, and that is putting core logs. Core is like coconut fiber, and it's being used, it's kind of a sort of a slightly more natural way. I mean, it's not natural, but it increases the integrity of a sediment berm in area that might have waves or higher tidal flow. So it kind of helps to lock it in place. So I'm going to walk you through the combined designs for the 5 areas now, but I'll pause for a moment in case anyone has any comment or question up until now.
I do.
No, Cheryl, you keep on going and finish the presentation.
Okay, yep, you're right. We might get sidetracked if I don't do that. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So this is our conceptual design A. It is intended for priority area 1, which is Chadwick Bayou, which is shown as this little dot on the top, roughly. So what we have suggested here, and I can't really see it because your faces are covering there. So if you go to the far right of the diagram, you can see the blue line and it's shaded blue. That's kind of that's, again, these are conceptual. That's the current mean high water. The line above it is a mean high water with 2 feet of sea level rise. So what we want to do is what we're suggesting, this is the existing profile, the dashed line. So what we need is to get part of this area up out of the mean high water plus 2 feet of sea level rise, and we can do that by building one of these berms. Again, remember, these are intended to slowly erode with time, and that sand, though, would be transported to help propagate mangrove seedlings that we suggest would be perfect for this area, and they're an inexpensive option for this existing mangrove fringe to continue to propagate. But there's also going to have to be other things, and in this case, I don't think there's going to be much choice but to elevate the roadbed in this case. But then that elevated roadbed not only gets the road up out of the water in the 2 feet of sea level rise scenario, but it also provides a flood levee for the infrastructure that is further to the west. And improving things like putting in rain gardens and swales that are really meant more for capturing overflow. And again, this would only be appropriate in areas that has this type of setting. So I'm zooming in on it now. If you notice on the previous one, I have this little overhead in the upper right. It's kind of hard to see. So what you're looking at here is a zoom in. Now you're looking at it like it was an aerial photograph. You're looking at it from down on the top, like a map. And so the overhead is just showing what this would look like visually. So you have, there's the existing road, there's existing houses. And the idea here is you have mangroves along Plantation Road right now, but putting in those mangrove seedlings to encourage propagation of the existing mangrove fringe to provide more protection, and having that feeder berm that will provide sediment for those little baby mangroves, as well as provide a little bit of wave energy dissipation. Section B is what ended up being designed for priority area 4, Buck Key, and I put the little red dot on the map. That's the area that's very protected from any kind of storm waves. And what we suggest can be done here, again, with your current mean high water and then your mean high water plus 2 feet of sea level rise, is to actually, not only onshore but offshore, increase the elevation, in this case of the seabed. Try to get some of those mangroves to propagate further out by planting a combination of young mangroves and mangrove seedlings. You have a little bit of existing mangrove, but again, you're trying to increase that mangrove fringe. And then actually elevating the yard, elevating the edge of the yard. So you get it up out of that danger zone just using fill. And then this is an area that would be really good for planting salt-tolerant vegetation, because you could occasionally, and if a storm came through, well, actually with Buck Key, you shouldn't get so much storm effect, but in the case that water does slosh up, you have the salt-tolerant vegetation there. And looking at that then from overhead as well, this is kind of what it would look like. You have your fill offshore. You put in a dock here, for example. The fill would have to be low enough on, say, this side for boat access, right? So we don't want any of this to get in the way of the ability to actually utilize the dock. Mangrove seedlings, young mangroves, and then here would be the kind of berm that elevates the actual edge of the yard with that salt-tolerant vegetation on top of it. Okay, C, remember there's 5 of these, so this is number 3. So this is for the area by Blind Pass. So the little red dot here, this is an area that's at the confluence of Roosevelt Channel and Blind Pass, high tidal flow. So, and potential exposure to waves. So we thought this would be a great idea to consider implementing reef balls. And instead of, because of the high tidal flow. And because the tidal flow is too high probably for little mangrove seedlings to take, putting in some young mangroves. And then similar to other areas, actually raising the elevation of the edge of the yard to get it up out of that mean high water plus 2 feet of sea level rise. And again, using that salt tolerant vegetation at the edge of the fill helps hold the fill in place and is more aesthetically pleasing. Okay, then the overhead, there's our reef balls. A big slug of fill with young mangrove, salt-tolerant vegetation. So that's kind of what it would look like from above. Okay, second to last. So D is one of the areas around the village. Remember, we had priority areas 2 or 3. This particular configuration design is for an area where there is no existing seawall. But remember, both these areas 2 and 3 had the potential for wave exposure. So in this case, we designed this with a we put in a berm that provides not only protection, but can act as a feeder berm. We put 4 logs at the center to make it a little robust. And we may even consider putting a rock sill at the toe to prevent erosion of the toe of our protective and feeder berm. And in this case, there's pretty significant elevation of the actual edge of the yard and planting upland species of mangroves. And again, the idea here is to increase that mangrove fringe and provide some protection. And this is like what it would look like on the overhead. The rock sill obviously doesn't extend underneath the dock because you don't want to limit boat access, but kind of the rock sill, and then you would have the fill with the 4 logs inside and young mangroves, and so on and so forth. And finally, section E would be, this is for an area where there is an existing seawall. And again, in a similar way, has a high potential for exposure to waves, and some tidal flow. So here we put in a pretty nice sized berm, fill it with 4 logs, put that rock sill there. So we are providing some protection, but what we want to do is increase the biodiversity in front of that seawall. And so the seawall's there, and chances are there's not a lot in front of the seawall, so we're trying to get things to propagate in front of the seawall, giving them a fighting chance by putting in the berm, recognizing that somewhere in the future, maybe you don't do this right away, but when you're getting to, when you reach 1 foot of sea level rise, you're thinking to 2 feet, that's when you might want to start thinking about raising that seawall for scenarios that are further down the road. And then again, this is what it looks like from overhead with the rock sill and the feeder berm and so on and so forth with the existing seawall, with the option to increase its height. So finally, I'll wrap up. These conceptual designs were meant to evaluate a variety of adaptation options. All the components of them are intended to be interconnected. The elements work together for the best chance of success. We had to take into consideration what would be permittable in an aquatic preserve. Now, these were intended to address 2 feet of sea level rise, but as I think you saw, the designs do incorporate some storm protection features. So in the event that the right storm came from the right direction, they should provide some protection, and then widening a mangrove fringe will also help with that. Maintenance will be required throughout the history of the project, similar to any adaptation plan, as I mentioned when I started the presentation. So that is it, and I'm sure you have lots of questions, so I will stop sharing. And
Thank you very much, Cheryl. So that we can get everybody's points of view, we're going to have each commissioner in turn spend 3 minutes, perhaps talking about something or asking a question. We'll get through all the commissioners, and then we'll open it up for a longer discussion with each individual commissioner as a one. So Vice Chair Michael, you can start.
Yeah, sure. Cheryl, thank you. In the blind pass area, your design, it doesn't incorporate the existing riprap that was incorporated in there about 35 years ago, which actually kind of stabilized the, as you said, the strong water flow, and also the seedlings that were planted there. I guess my question would be, there is some people on the island saying that would it be nice or possible, and it's just a question, to have some kind of permanent wall with behind that wall, the salt tolerant plants, and then after the wall, the riprap with seedlings planted so that it grows like it is right now in half of Blind Pass, actually. And then from there, adding on your, what we call them WADs, wave attenuation devices, the cone circles. And I was just curious if that would conflict with that design. Because you already have the existing riprap wall that goes for about 1,000 feet.
Right. So, I mean, these are intended to be conceptual and not actual site-specific designs. And certainly, I hear what you're saying, and you're right. I mean, so if we were actually to recommend implementation of an adaptation strategy, we would have to take that existing riprap into account. But you certainly could. I mean, if it's already there, you're not going to spend the money likely to take it out. And so since it does have healthy mangroves on it, I think doing like exactly what you said is planting some type of salt tolerant vegetation seaward of it, and then trying to get some mangroves and putting the WAVs or whichever reef balls you want to call them there's no reason why that couldn't be done.
Right, so you could incorporate it. Also, but my question was, I think I have 1 minute left. Could one put in a cement barrier 2 feet higher where the fill would be from, in other words, from the house before the existing living seawall? Would there be anything wrong with or right with incorporation of an actual seawall during, not really more of an inundation event versus a storm protection?
So seawalls, I mean, I'm saying it can be done. It would be very expensive. It's a very expensive option, and what has been found with seawalls is oftentimes it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain the kind of biodiversity that you want to maintain sort of the existing ecosystems in front of a seawall. I mean, so it's, again, this isn't me, in my opinion, this is the literature and, the Corps of Engineers and that kind of thing, that hardening, putting that wall in is, you can end up having scour and end up eroding things away a lot faster by having that wall there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Powell, still not.
No, he's not here.
All right, Commissioner Laird.
One question I have that I've never asked before was that in Chadwick Bayou, when it goes up 2 feet and now it's inundated, all those mangroves are inundated that we have there now, what happens to them?
To the mangroves?
Yeah, you know how it sweeps around in a nice sort of
Yeah.
shape.
So mangroves, mangroves, and especially most of the types of mangroves that are there are wanting to be exposed to air and to salt water at certain intervals. And if they are exposed, if they're underwater more than a certain threshold limit, and I'm not a mangrove biologist, so I can't tell you what that limit is, but I know that there is a limit, they are submerged and they will start to die off. They will start to drown.
So in order to save those, one would have to do some sediment burns around.
Yeah.
And keep feeding them so
Yes.
that they can keep growing up nicely.
That's correct. That's correct.
That's it.
That's it? That's pretty short, Linda. What are you doing? Oh, yeah.
Asleep
keep
at the wheel here.
Commissioner Walter, please. You have 3 minutes and then we'll go up and open the discussion.
Thank you. I don't think I'll take 3 minutes like Linda, because I think Linda's seen this 5 times. I've seen it twice. So I've already asked some questions. But Ms. Hapke, if you could put up the Chadwick Bayou slide, I got more of a question for us, the CPD, as well.
Hang on, I'm looking to share. There. Okay.
Actually, the one that showed the base side. I don't know what slide it was. It was
Oh,
yeah,
you want the picture?
the 2 feet of sea ice.
Gotcha. This one?
That'll work. To the group, if you see Chadwick Bayou, the word Chadwick Bayou, and you go to the left, you see that set of mangroves that are pointing out just under and to the left of the one. Straight down, to the left,
Here?
to the left, right down, right there. That group of mangoes right below your cursor.
Right.
I don't know if everyone knows this, but that's an Indian burial ground. So, I mean, if there's funding to be made, that might be an avenue we take to look at this.
I've been trying to figure out where that was for years, and I finally figured it out from this slide, that must be it.
So
Yeah,
that's-
there's
is
an
that that
Indian,
mountain?
no, it's actually where the larger mangroves are down. That,
Okay.
to the right half of that is literally where they had lived. And then to the left of that, mangrove area is literally a burial ground.
Wow.
So I mean, that's something to think about. You know, we need to preserve all the land, but
Yeah,
that's certainly some funding opportunities, I think.
yeah, that's good information to have.
Very much so.
Preserving cultural features is really important.
Thank you. I'll defer my time to someone else.
So before I open it up to Chairman Michael again for more broader inquiries, question for Bob. Who actually funds the upkeep on that Indian burial ground now?
There is no upkeep. We keep people off of it, and it just
That's it? No grass to
unknown.
cut?
No. It's in the mangroves. In
Okay.
fact, there used to be a path that worked its way out when people knew about it back in the day, but we allowed the mangroves to grow up over that to keep people from walking back there.
Mhm.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Chairman Michael, the floor is open. You on mute?
No, I'm good. I
Okay.
really enjoyed the presentation. I have to personally start, and anyone can start Googling other concepts and just see the full menu. But
Yeah.
thank you, Ms. Hapke, for, Cheryl, for, putting that together. It was very enlightening. And
Good.
with my ego and thinking I know everything, I was very enlightened by some of your very creative proposals.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of research went into this. It's not, we are getting very familiar with, different elements, but I'm glad I could teach you something today.
Cool.
Okay. Commissioner Laird, do you have any more comments?
Well,
Okay.
yes, I have a comment. I'll take some comments.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Oh, okay, I covered up my mic.
It's much better. Yeah.
Being involved with this for such a long time, I didn't have a view as to what these adaptation strategies could be, would be. And I only, I know that Renee has, or people have thought about, can't we just put riprap along the back and plant some mangroves and be done with it, which sounded good to me because it was simple and we could do one and done. I personally was impressed with the solutions that Cheryl and Dr. Hapke and her company came up with, because they are both, they protect from inundation. They also have some sustainability in them, in that they sort of keep, like with the feeder berms and things like that, and the natural elements keep growing. And also we protect the protection, like where we, in front of the seawalls. So it's not saying take out the seawalls or build seawalls. It's, we have seawalls, let's build things in front of them to protect it and to protect both the island and the environment. I, for one, who, as we all think about, should we sell our properties before we go underwater? I, for one, am very heartened by the whole thing, because I believe there are solutions that are beyond building a 2 or 3 foot seawall along the back end, which is not what I would, it's very expensive. It's the most expensive option, and really not what I would envision in the island I was living on. But I'm heartened that I think we're good through 2050. We're good through 2060 if we do something like this, which exceeds my expectations as to what we could do. And I think it's not, I mean, it's very expensive, but it's not crazy expensive. So, and in keeping with Captiva. So I was it all exceeded my expectations and hopes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Walter, and more comments?
No, thank you. I'm sorry, I was checking to see if I was on mute.
Okay,
All
right, so-
Chairman, just one more item just for Dr. Hapke's frame of reference. Cheryl, I have a revetment in Massachusetts. It's about 600 feet long. I worked with very good construction company, and the core logs that now they're kind of forcing in Plymouth, he said they're horrific. They don't take any punishment whatsoever. The only thing that they are good for is along the bluff where, like you said, it holds the sediment in place, but the minute the water touches it, it's toast. So I
Yeah.
would just an FYI that it's been a, my revetment is done with field stones. But it was, I think it's on the website with the Fish and Game as best practices. But the point being is that you might want to really look into the core logs, the coconut fiber logs. They're more of a horticultural barrier that holds the dirt in place. But the second there's any force from the water, it's
Yeah, I'm just curious,
Not
Renee, is your property, is it oceanfront or is it
it's
openly
it's-
exposed?
yeah. Well, no, it's literally where the ocean meets Cape Cod Bay.
Yeah, so I would never recommend core logs in an
Yeah,
environment
well,
like that.
They're
Yeah.
stuck now, unless your home is 50 years old. That's all they're putting in because they're.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of-
I would, I could see that those would just break apart. I mean, with wave energy, that, I mean, they're really more intended for estuarine environments.
yeah, luckily,
in my
my house
opinion.
is 90 years old, so I get to put the revetment in. But yeah, no, just an FYI,
Yeah.
it
Thank you.
has issues.
Yeah,
Okay, so my turn. The 2 feet is simply an assumption, is that correct? That's not a prediction?
well, it's taken from NOAA. It is based on NOAA's intermediate high prediction. So we don't predict, Integral doesn't predict. That's directly from the best source that anybody knows to go to, and that's NOAA.
John,
Okay, I will have, go ahead, Linda.
so this was one of the first things that the committee worked on. And it was, what should we be planning towards? And we first thought about time, but what was clear was that it's not based, I mean, yes, it's a function of time, but there's so many different scenarios, nobody really knows what's going to happen. And maybe we will do things to slow it down, maybe it will speed up. So we picked looking at different sea level rise scenarios instead, looking at 1 foot, 2 foot, 4 foot. Which is what's in the vulnerability assessment. And what became clear as Suri Segal walked in and said, well, it looks like we're planning for 2 feet because 4 feet is basically all over. And so what we found out was the best practice is to plan for an amount of sea level rise rather than a time frame, because we can't say 2 feet in XYZ amount of time. That's also one of the reasons we got the tide gauge off our docks out here. And so we're starting to track what the actual sea level is on Captiva to help us over time understand what the real increase in sea level is.
Well, I will have to go back and look with Dan at the graph that I saw with respect to NOAA. And there are a significant range of projections,
Yes.
but that's something we will look at. My question to Commissioner Walter, how high is the roadbed at Castaways?
At Castaways, I have no idea.
Not
Okay,
very high.
if that's more than 2 feet, then we don't have an argument.
Yeah.
Because if
I know
that
I know the
roadbed is
elevation-
below 2 feet, that roadbed has to be raised.
Yeah,
How are we gonna do
I
that?
know the elevation of all the roads in Captiva.
Yeah,
no,
It's
Joel
DVD.
is on the call, or at least was, and Joel is the Sanibel guy. So he may be able to answer this for you. Because, so, yeah, here comes Joel. He knows what's going on up at Castaways and all through Santiva. We all agree, if we can't get off Sanibel, it doesn't help so well to get off Captiva, but whatever.
Yeah. So Jill, you want to tell me what's the roadbed?
Jill, you're on mute.
I unfortunately do not have micro.
Can you type it into the chat, Jill?
The guess is it's about 1 or 2 feet. Hmm.
If Joel can type it into the chat while we're waiting for him to do that, maybe you could move
Okay.
ahead.
So my question, and I think David Nintz is on the line. One of the options is to raise the roadbed. Who decides how to raise that roadbed and who pays for that roadbed?
Which roadbed?
One of the options talked about raising the roadbed.
Oh, that option is that was the option for South Seas. If you look at the vulnerability assessment, what you see is the South Seas Road going underwater. The Captiva Drive, most of the way, especially in front of Tween Waters, is already raised to 6 feet above sea level. And we're, oh, thank you. Renee, it's 6 feet NGVD. I don't know NGDV, whatever that is.
It's whatever that means. It's the road everywhere in both barrier islands is a minimum of 6 feet navigable. It's like the average tide. The average.
Okay, okay.
And it's just like measured on. Yeah, it's 6 feet.
Okay, okay. But John, the road in South Seas is not that. And so for people to be able to get out of the South Seas Resort, you have to get the road there up.
Okay, so the question is, who pays for that? And is it county approved, the state approved? What are we doing?
What are we doing? We don't have an implementation plan. It could be, it's just like who pays for anything. So let me be more clear. When we go after grants, if we can get the grants to pay for it, that would be it. Would it be South Seas paying for it? I don't know. I think this is not one of those things that we just go to the county and say the road is too low, give us money. They're not going to do it. I don't think, unless it works differently than I've seen things in the past. We're going to have to, in my opinion, get different funding. We're going to have to get engineering done for the parts we think are the most important. Then we're going to have to get funding for those engineering diagrams. And it's this huge thing to do for an implementation strategy. Is that right, Cheryl?
Yes, and I was going to say you're heading down the right path for sure, Linda. And I think to answer the commissioner is that so generally there's a lot of money out there for resilient
Right.
projects and building things. And when I say there's a lot of money, it's in state and in federal funds that are coming down through the infrastructure bill. So there's increase in a lot of cases. There may be a matching requirement. So say something like there would have to be certain matching, like South Seas would have to come up with 25% or whatever, 4-to-1, something like that. But there are a lot of funding areas that are becoming available more and more now. So
And if you look in the FDEP guidelines, you saw when Cheryl put it up, we are at number 3 off doing adaptation strategies. Then we start moving into the implementation phase, and they have a process there. And I personally didn't worry about that because yet.
Okay. So
Okay.
Cheryl,
Can I ask a quick question? Wouldn't we handle this just like a nourishment project?
I don't know.
Yes.
that's another option as well.
I don't know. I think that sounds reasonable. Or, I mean, can you make the, I don't know. Can you make the argument at South Seas Road, so you need to pay for it? Or can you make the
Yeah.
argument that the island is all blah? I don't know, it gets into this allocation stuff again, right?
Go ahead.
So just to interrupt really quickly, this is Jen Nelson. The county, excuse me, the county is responsible for our roadways, and you're absolutely right. We would have to have some sort of an implementation plan to be able to present to get funding for it. I think everybody's right so far on this call. And I think one of the things to note is when we do finally put together what our implementation plan looks like, part of our strategic plan is going to be involved with funding that. So in other words, as we go through and we start a strategic plan this year for the CPD, that funding mechanism has to go along with the implementation. And you're right, Commissioner Walter, it would be just like a renourishment project, only we would do it for the Bayside. So, and it would be every however many years. And that's something, as I've been interviewing or speaking with two actually potential strategic planning organizations that are going to help us, that's something that they both have told me is that it would grow to be just like a nourishment project, but resiliency project on the Bayside.
The only challenge that you might face is the road within South Seas is not county.
Oh, it's not, okay.
No.
Okay, so my question to Cheryl then, you talked a lot about Chadwick Bayou and doing different options. Is SCCF okay with that? As SCCF says you can do those options?
I will let Carrie Schumann, who's on the call, maybe speak to that if she'd like, but so far we have heard no objection. Carrie, do you want to?
More the DEP.
Yeah.
That's the DEP. Listen, I got to say something. I don't think South Seas could build a road less than 6 feet NGVD. They still have to get a permit. And again, I've got a text into Randy Searchy, who built, who's the supervisor of road building. And how could South Seas get a permit to build a lower road? They still got to get a permit, and it has to be with the standard, where the standard is 6 feet NGVD. So it's.
But it isn't.
You know that it isn't.
It
How do
isn't.
you know that? How do you know that? It's the question.
Because I kayaked there and I rode my bike there and I look at the maps and it goes underwater.
Wait a minute, the asphalt road that we're talking about, the 19
Yeah.
mile an hour road.
So where's the 2 feet?
It's less than two. It's probably about 2 feet.
It's
It
about
goes
2
up-
feet. Yeah, it's
Listen,
about,
we get water up against the road during super high tides.
right.
Wow. All right, well, that was my question. I'm surprised that Al Tempson could have got away building
I
the
picked
road.
a different one.
More
It's
lower.
That was then. That was then.
Yeah,
Wait a second, I know what it is.
I just say, Renee,
Yeah,
Renee,
he built the road higher.
Justify us
speaking,
saying,
just as South Seas give you an idea, I just met with Kevin Irwin. I don't know if you know Kevin. He's a topography, he used to be with the DEP.
Right,
He actually was part of the original planning out here back in the 70s and 80s. He was with the DP at the time and shut Tenbrook and the group down because they didn't have any civil engineering when they did any of the roads out here. The original road was on the beach. And then they haphazardly, in the late 70s, moved it to where it is now. But there was never any civil engineering done or anything like that to do it correctly.
and
And then,
also,
to Linda's point, that was then, this is now. Even if they did, it would be different.
yeah, and I just recollect that for the past 35 years, Lee County has come in and elevated the roads, Sanibel and Captiva, to get it to 6 feet now for about maybe 3 or 4 occasions. So, and I'm sure that was not done in South Seas. So everyone's right here. You got to get a permit. They didn't get a permit. And then because it's a private road, it never rose up. So probably is 2 or 3 feet.
So my next question is for Cheryl, and if David Nintz is on the call. In one of those areas, it strikes me that is the set aside for the artist residents.
Yeah.
And so what is the responsibility then in terms of that artist residents? And I believe, and I think David Nitz pointed out to me that they were moving certain properties more center to the island. David, is that correct? I think he's on the call.
David, you're on mute.
Can I speak? Can you actually hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware that I could even, okay.
Hey, pal, everybody gets called on here.
Oh, okay. You asked a couple of questions. In any comprehensive plan that CPD develops in conjunction with SCCF or with Sanibel, if you're talking about areas where the Blind Pass bridges, and you would have a comprehensive plan, and there would probably be different levels of funding from different sources, depending whether you're dealing with private property, county roads, private roads. And so you would have to, that would all be figured out in the comprehensive plan and have different levels of funding depending on who's responsible for what areas of property. In terms of the Rauschenberg property, they have a bayfront piece of property, about 20 acres. A lot of it is on the bay side. They have made a decision not to fight nature on the bay side in certain areas, and then to return those areas very close to the bay that have been flooded in the past. And they've decided to let them return to marshlands and let nature take its course. In so doing, they're going to move vulnerable properties to places where they won't be vulnerable, and they will move their operations to places where they won't be vulnerable. But anything east of the road, or portions of their property east of the road, will be returned to nature. But Kiva Drive will still be there, and that Captiva Drive will have to be protected within any comprehensive plan that CEPD develops for Captiva. I don't know if that.
David, because what I was trying to figure out is, had they taken any of the steps that Cheryl had suggested in terms of dealing with their property. So let me ask Cheryl then. Okay, so the Rauschenbergs don't do anything. All right, they just leave it, go back to nature. When I look at your graph on that 2 feet rise, am I to believe that that's what we're going to actually get with a 2 feet rise, since Rauschenbergs are not doing anything about it?
I'm not sure I quite comprehend the question. So, I mean, I have actually worked with the Rauschenberg property and their landscape architects, and they've, shared what their plans are, and they're actually going to put in some elevated walkways and that sort of thing. It's called WYZ Studios out of New York City is doing the work with them, and so we are aware of what they're going to do. So, and they're putting in rain gardens and some, more natural vegetation, as was stated. So my question, can you rephrase your question? I think I got.
Well, basically, my understanding from David's comments is the Rauschenbergs are sort of, let this go back to nature. Okay, letting it go back to nature means you ain't doing anything. And if you're not doing anything, you only get 2 feet sea level rise. Is that correct? And is that consistent with the graph you showed us? That area is going to be, quote, inundated with the 2 feet and nothing's going to get done. Correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. And that's consistent. That's what we want to see. Excellent. So let me ask you this question. We've got a lot of options. Do we have any ability to translate an option into its impact on sea level rise? If I plant 50 mangrove trees, how much of a sea level rise do I prevent? We have any way of judging that? Yeah,
planting mangroves will not protect you from sea level rise, and they weren't intended to. The mangroves will help dissipate wave energy in the event of a storm. That's clearly been shown to happen.
Right.
So widening your mangrove fringe gives you two things. It increases your biodiversity and your ecosystem function by making a larger area of the ecosystem, and then it provides a wider field for dissipating wave energy.
John, these are
Yes.
design options, and what has to happen next is actually engineering for the sites. And once you get the engineering for the sites, then you can ask the engineer, tell the engineering that you want it to protect for 2 feet of sea level rise. And
Got it.
then you'll get a engineered real design for that.
Right.
That's how it would work.
And what I'm trying to get at again is, for example, there was a comment about reef balls. Okay. What is my impact? Is there an impact on manatees? And who do we have to be concerned with about fishing and manatees if we start putting in reef balls? Is that the Florida Department of whatever it is?
So
What
I
is-
can speak to
ahead.
that. And it's actually quite interesting that you asked that. So in the design, well, they're putting them in the Tampa Bay estuary program, the ones down near my house, right? And that is part of a national estuary. And so those, the rules apply there. They're similar to the rules that apply at the state. They actually have designed them that where the reef balls the rows of reef balls overlap, and they have a gap area so that if any large, like a marine mammal, a dolphin, a manatee, whatever, were to swim in at high tide, and then they would have an avenue to get out. So they're actually designed to accommodate and prevent trapping a larger marine animal.
Yeah, we don't want to strand any manatees.
No, we don't.
So listen, the question, next question, Cheryl. 2 feet. What are the rules now for the height on the docks and piers that are out there? Are they going to have to be moved if we have a 2 feet scenario?
Depends on what the
Are they too
elevation
low?
is at now. I mean, if they're very low, that they probably will have to. That would have to be done on a site by site interpretation,
Right.
and understanding what the elevation of each one is.
Excellent. Yep, good. Let me ask a question. Again, I don't know if Jay Brown is still on the line or not. One of the options in terms of filling in the mangroves and Buck Key and everything, what's going to be the impact on the water level for the boats? And does that alter the channel and the speed of the water flow if we start to narrow that channel? It seems that if I do hydro power in that area, my stream is going to go faster. That water flow is going to be faster, and it might change the channel. And what impact does that have on boats?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Yeah. It can have impacts, on boating and, navigation around, the edges of the waterways. That's just part of what's going to have to be, considered in the overall plan. That's going to be a factor in it.
So Jay, who do we have to go through to get that? Let's say we take Cheryl's proposal and we do something about Buck Key, and immediately, who do we clear this through that we're going to do something?
I think it would probably have to be DEP.
And
Okay.
is
Yeah, it's
DEP
an aquatic
covered?
reserve.
Who covers the aquatic preserve? DEP? Or is
DEP did us, yeah.
Yeah, and is there there's an aquatic preserve board as well as DEP, or are they one and the same, or I don't know how this works. Anybody know?
Yeah.
No, I don't. That's just one of, there's going to be hundreds of considerations, on all these designs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be different by different areas, and you're also going to be faced with, in some cases, I think there's going to be trade-offs between how natural a shoreline you want and how much do you want it to be able to, hold back, the rising seas, and how much do you want to compromise people's views out of that back of their houses if you're going to plant a lot of vegetation. So
Yep.
there's going to be a lot of pros and cons, with both approaches.
You got it, Jay. You're speaking to the choir on that one. Listen, on Blind Pass, if you're putting in the reef balls or all this other stuff, we have a lot of charter fishing craft. Are they going to be able to identify where these balls are so that they don't crash the boat or get into problems? How do we handle that in Blind Pass?
Well, fishing, I don't think you have to worry about fishing guides. They will figure out, where reef balls are and stuff. And knowing fishing guys, they'll be happy that they're there because they're gonna attract a lot of fish.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Well, and they
And then we
also
have-
do what in the design that's kind of cool. They put these stake, like just a PVC stake in the ground, and that stick up about twice the height of the reef balls. And because the reef balls are put in kind of at mean high water, it's unlikely to be a depth that's very navigable. I can't get the word out by boat, but also the PVC kind of would alert them that there's something there.
Well, Cheryl or Jay, let me ask you this question then. For someone who comes in from Fort Myers and is an individual with a family or whatever it is, and they decide, they're not fishing guides, they decide to come into Blind Pass, are we going to have a problem with them as a recreational boater hitting one of those reef balls?
You could have, but I think that we would probably wind up putting in aids to navigation to keep people away from them. And to
Good.
warn people about the presence of those things, that's done quite a bit.
And Jay, those navigational guides, who does that?
You know, the Coast Guard in the past has done it. I don't know present day. I'm not up to speed on who you call to put in navigation aids. I just know it gets done over time.
Wouldn't that be part of the entire scope, though?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't
Yes.
that be part of the entire scope?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yeah,
John,
I mean,
John,
go ahead,
it's-
David.
It's David Mintz. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but the whole area that we're speaking of within a very short period of time, and most of it is already, will be a no-wake, slow-speed zone. So the area around Blind Pass, as well as all the way down Roosevelt Channel, all the way starting from Chadwick Bayou, once you get towards the land of Captiva, it will be a slow-speed, no-wake zone.
What sort of is now, correct?
No, there are parts of it that have been returned,
Oh, I'm sorry, you're talking the channel.
a full speed zone, and that's now going to be returned to a no wake zone.
Right. Now, and also most of these areas where we're looking at putting reef balls and stuff are at high tide at best 3 feet of water now, correct? 4 feet tops?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Oh, what?
Blind Pass is probably about 5 feet deep on average now, running by the edge of the docks. And then as you get closer to the south side of it, it shallows up to nothing, the no depth. But the amount of water depth in Blind Pass is a constantly changing, thing. And people that boat in that area are kind of used to it, and know how to get around. Boaters coming in from the outside, I doubt, they're gonna venture there because you can't really get under Blind Pass Bridge, so you're not gonna come in, seaward. And, to navigate down Wolford Channel, unless you know what you're doing, most boaters aren't gonna attempt to do that, I don't think.
Great. Okay, so with respect to areas D and E, Captiva Island, etc., 2 issues I have. One of the options, Cheryl, you talked about was elevating the yards. And the second one was raising the existing seawall. So my impression is this is existing private property that we're talking about altering. But if you elevate a yard or you raise the existing seawall, and again, I'm not a real estate agent, you are changing the value of the property. If I have a very low seawall, and David knows that condo development at the end of, on the opposite side of our street, Captiva Sunset or Sunset, whatever it is, they have a very low seawall. But what it allows is someone sitting at the pool can look directly into the bay. If you elevate that seawall, you're breaking up their view. That's got to have an impact on the value of their property. So my question then to Cheryl is, if you're dealing, and you maybe have dealt with this in the past, if you're dealing with truly private property, we're not talking about Chadwick Bayou or anything else. How do you get 2 people to try to say, this might be the cost, this is what you might have to do, but it's private property. We can't force them to do anything, can we?
So I'm not a real estate agent either. My guess is that you can't force anybody to do it, to do something unless, or, you know, the whole point of this exercise to some degree is to start educating people. And the idea with these adaptation strategies is that they are embraced community-wide and not addressed on an individual by individual property as has been done in the past. So that, you know, is that going to be easy? No, and I understand that. But to try to get the community to sort of work together so larger stretches do similar sorts of things if their properties are similar. The raising the seawall was purely optional. That was, you know, that was, you know, and it's spelled out in the designs that is an optional thing. If that group of houses or whatever one, you know, really decides that they'd rather, you know, they'll sacrifice their view over the inundation issue, that will be a decision that they will need to make. So, and then in terms of there are ways of getting at the cost benefit and the values of properties, and that's certainly something that we can do. We actually have the capacity to do that within Integral, and we just haven't gotten to that stage yet.
Yeah, because I think it should be clear to everybody, we got a lot of moving parts here from a lot of different organizations. And as we go forward in trying to put together some kind of plan, we do have that ultimate challenge that we are dealing primarily with private properties. And if I may refer to Jay Brown's place, you know, if Jay were to do something to limit the sea level rise on his property and his neighbor does nothing, the one next door, then you've got all these other issues about externalities that come in here. Any other commissioners have any final comments? Because I think this is a wonderful presentation. It shows, I think, the complexity of the problems we are dealing with, and that we need a lot of different organizations to get things together. It'll be a challenge coordinating anything that can be done, because we have a lot of stakeholders here. But any other commissioners have any comments?
Just a quick comment, Chairman, based on your comments. Keep in mind that all the properties in the bay, and I can count on my left hand how many properties are still left that are at ground level, are elevated. So even if there was an extension of 4 feet on their backyard, I don't think it's going to be a limitation of views. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think it would be as bad as one thinks. And by the time we get around to actually building a resiliency plan, there's, you know, more homes sold, more homes built, you know, homes are scraped, homes are rebuilt. And when they build them, they got to be anywhere from 11 to 16 feet NGVD, you know, over the ground, but, you know, over the actual water level. So right now, my home where I live is built between 13 and 15 feet above sea level. So point being is that it won't be such an issue as one might assume right now. It's all just a point of observation.
Linda, Bob, any other comments?
I do not, thank you.
You got it. All right.
Can I just say one thing? I want to thank you again. What I really want to do is commend you for starting on this process, because it is a long process and it is a complex and difficult process. And by starting on it now, it might be 10 years before things are actually being built or fully built, but you're taking a really important first step now, and that is really, that's good, and you're kind of leading the way for Southwest Florida. So I just want to make that point.
Excellent, thank you. Comments are now closed. Is there a motion to adjourn?
First, I'd like to, then my comments are, thank you so much, Cheryl, for doing all of this. And this is this has been funded by a community effort. CEPD put in a good chunk of change. We had private citizens putting in a good chunk of change. as well as the CCA and the panel. So I think it was a nice example of our community pulling to fund and get this work going.
Thank you, Linda.
Mhm.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Yes,
Bob,
Yeah, all in favor?
yeah.
aye.
Anybody opposed to a longer discussion with more questions? Workshop is adjourned.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much,
all.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.